Hey guys, welcome back to Fur Friday. Bonnita from Bonnita Doodles, and today we are going to be drawing some wolf fur. We're going to start off as same as we did last week actually. So I'm just using, I didn't actually mention this I don't think in last week's tutorial, I'm just using a bit of leftover lino from the bathroom floor that we had some spare, no, my office floor actually. And it's really good for using on this type of thing. So if you're ever past a carpet shop, check their chuck out bit because you can get some of these for nothing. If you haven't got one of these, then just grab yourself some folded cardboard. Try and make sure that the cardboard is folded a minimum of 2 times. If you use paper, a minimum of 4 times. And that's purely because you need to have a bit of give. I'm going to get a large piece under mine, because your valleys need to be deep enough that they don't fill up with pencil as you go over them. So last week's, for example, all these little white highlights in here are done using this method. So it is really worth making sure that you don't do it directly on your desk. Again, I'll very briefly go over. I use a ball tool, or they're known as nail art or dotting tools, and you get 4 in a pack. Get them in the pound shop, and you get 8 different sizes in total, so it's really good value for money, and you get all the various sizes depending on the size of the drawing that you're doing. Now the wolf fur that I'm doing, you'll see the reference is actually one of my own photos that I took at Wingham Wildlife Park, and there is an awful lot of highlights in there, so I'm only going to do a certain amount by the ball tool because I don't want the entire thing just covered in indents, because we're actually going to be working more on the shadows and leaving a lot of negative space rather than trying to ensure that we get lots of highlights over the top. So I'm just going to do very short sporadic motion, and I'm not going to do tons and tons and tons, but I am going to do enough that they do aid in the long run, because wolf fur, particularly on this section, has got a heck of a lot of highlights on there, so it is just going to help speed that process up. But as I say, I don't want absolutely tons on there. I want to be showing you how we can do it by leaving negative space at the same time. So we're going to be doing a lot of glazing underneath before we even go over with the dark details. So let's just get all this done. Okay, I sped that bit up for you, but that's the only bit that you're going to have sped up on this particular tutorial. So as much as I can, we'll be doing these real time. So I'm just going to get my Scotch tape. To take some of the tack away, just rub it on your jumper or trousers, t-shirt, something that will just pick up the flick, and it just helps it so it's not so sticky. So I mean, it's really good stuff anyway, but you want to avoid any chance that you may, you may tear your paper up as you lift it. So try and get rid of some of that tacky part of it if you can. I'm reusing from the previous tutorial, so I didn't have to use any more tape up. There we go. Okay, so I said it in the last tutorial, we're pretty much going to end up using the same colours as we have done previously, but we're actually going to work a little bit in reverse this time round. So what I'm going to do is work on the darkest patches first, and there are a lot of those, but there are some that are very obvious and very big. So they're the ones that we're going to get in before we do anything. So these are the absolute darkest ones that I feel need picking out the most. And I imagine actually that this one is going to take quite a long time to really build up, because the fur is so dense, and you can see that in the picture just how dense that fur is. It's not going to be a simple case of doing 4 or 5 layers and it's going to look okay. I think we're going to be looking at several layers on this one. So it's going to be a bit longer than last week, but grab your snacks, grab your pen, your pencil, just practice, and yeah, we'll get through this together. Okay, so now I've got where I want those darkest patches. But what we don't want to do is, as we build up, we don't want to lose those. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to wash over the whole thing with ivory. Again, I'm not worried about smudging, I'm not worried about smearing. And at this stage I'm not too concerned about direction. I've managed to get the muscle memory in my hand now where I can do large areas without leaving any gaps or pencil lines, and the more and more you do these, the more you'll be able to do that as well. So okay, so we've got a good coating of ivory there. Now this is where I would be tempted to actually bring in the Pablo brownish beige, but I want to try and keep these polychromos for you. I do have a conversion chart available to my patrons which convert to the Pablos and the polychromo colours together, but I'm sure you'll be able to find one online if you are not one of my patrons, or you can actually buy it for a couple of quid from my Etsy store, so the link to that is in the description below. Now, last week we did fairly long strokes in the fur. They have very dense fur and there is quite a length to them, whereas actually on the wolf fur it tends to, I don't even know how to describe it very well, but it tends to point up more than lay back. So you're going to need a lot of shorter strokes when we come to do the fur on this one. So I am going to do that now. I'm going to apply it just by doing a crisscross motion. And of course you're barely going to see much difference over the ivory, but it makes a huge difference to the tones that we have underneath and the subtle lines that you need to be able to see. So just bear with me and go along with me, and I need to write these down as well. So we've got ivory, we had dark sepia, and the warm grey. And we're essentially just going to build up through the various greys that we're going to be using this exact motion. Now you can see the direction in which the fur is laying, but it is still quite all over the place. The tips aren't all lined up and they're not all nice and neat, which is one of the things that I say to you quite often through these tutorials, is don't have them all lined up like nice neat little soldiers, because that is not how they are, and this is a really good example to show you that. Okay, so that was our warm grey 2. Warm grey 6, and we're going straight in with the warm grey 6, and what we want is a nice sharp point. And we are going to do each fur stroke. And it's really important on this type of fur that you follow the direction. So as we come around, we have to get that arch in that you see in that fur. If you don't get that arch in, you're not going to get the fur direction going in the way that it should, which means it's going to look quite unnatural. Where we have these dark patches, you can fill those in, get some nice dark lines coming out from them, going into the lighter sections of the fur. I've been a bit naughty and I've worked from the bottom, but ideally you should be working from the top left if you're right-handed, or top right if you're left-handed. It just stops you working over your work and ruining the pencil that you've put down. So let's switch it up now before I get really naughty. So this grey is acting as our mid-tone. It's not acting as our shadow. And we've already got the ivory underneath that's going to be acting as our highlight. And when we come and build up these shadow areas, we can build up some more detail in there as well. So I need to keep mine a little bit shorter. We're much lighter on this side than we are on this side, so when we come to do this side we can actually afford to do them a little bit longer, and we can just be a bit lighter with our stroke. And as I mentioned in previous ones, you can see again from the original photo to just how far zoomed in I am. So in reality you wouldn't be drawing quite in this much intense detail unless you're doing a very large portrait. But again, it just shows and indicates and gives you an idea of how we get those details in, how we get the coloration and the shadows and just the movement of the fur. I think we could probably do a bit of a glazing over this side. Yeah, and then we just need to soften these shadows out a bit. We're doing that with the ivory, and the ivory just blends out those shadows. And then we can just build up on top if we need to. What we'll do near the end of the stages of where we are at, good English there, I'm just going to grab my eraser. I'll just show you a quick snippet now, and then we'll probably soften over the top of certain areas, and it just brings certain highlights back, and then we can just work our way through the highlights, through the shadows, and it just creates that depth, that really nice soft depth you need. So we need to be much shorter as we come around here. We could probably space it a bit more as well. So we're leaving more of a gap in between each of the shadow strokes that we're putting down. And this is when I talk about leaving negative space, this is pretty much what I mean. So you're leaving certain areas with the colour that you see underneath. Just keep following the direction of the fur. I may have sped some of this process up for you, but that's just so you're not falling asleep looking at me or even hearing the hypnotic sound of the pencil hitting the paper. Once we've established this fur direction, we are then going to start going in and adding little clumps of shadow again. And at this stage I'm probably going to stick to the same colour that I have in my hand. And we're just going to soften some of these shadows out. Get some more in there. Because there are just so many. When you do this with things next to it that are relative to the image that you're drawing, it tends to make much more sense. When you're drawing at one, this scale, and two, just a patch, a lot of it doesn't make sense to the eye because it can't associate, one, the animal that it belongs to, and two, sort of where on the animal it is, or even if it is indeed fur, you know, we can indicate that, and our brain is very clever at filling in information. But it can also look very nonsensical when you're working in this style. But again, it's just teaching you techniques, and it's those techniques that you take forward into your drawing and will improve. So we know that we can go much darker this end, so we're just going to glaze over that a bit more. I'm being quite rough with my glazing so we get a little bit of that colour left underneath and we're not going too far into our indentation. I would say at this stage that we would probably be looking, when we go forward, at going in. Yeah, I'm just testing to see whether or not going in with the slice will help, and I do think it will. So we're going to keep layering on top because we don't have enough yet to even consider going in with the slice tool yet. I'm going to swap over to the Payne's Grey. And again, that's just going to help us establish, get some darker stuff in there, darker shadows, and it also gives us a slightly cooler tone to some of the areas. Let's work on these shadow chunks of fur. And what you want to do is you just want to bring some first strokes out from that patch, and then it makes it feel like it's much more part of it. But it's very stumpy, the ends are very stumpy and very sharp on this fur. So that's what you want to get it indicating, these very tiny small bits of fur. So don't be afraid at this point just to go in and add lots of bits of detail in shadow. I'm going to glaze over a bit of the areas that need to be slightly darker with the Payne's grey. I do regret actually doing it at this size. I wish I'd found a larger patch, if I'm quite honest with you, just because it probably would have been easier for you to see exactly what I mean, but it gives you a good idea of the technique that you can use, and you'll find your own ways of doing things as well. Going in with a lot more detail, crisscrossing, hatching, just making it nice and messy. So when you come over to like this little bit here, it's not actually too bad at the moment. We don't really need to do much, but you can then just come in with your eraser and just lift some of that colour. But as I say, we don't actually necessarily need to do it on here as yet. I do think that I am actually going to come in with some black. I just realised after all that I wasn't actually using the Payne's grey, so let's swap that over. Payne's grey. Silly me. So this type of fur does take a lot of building up. I say when you draw at a much larger scale, these sort of areas in here are much easier to get your lights and your darks into, so bear that in mind. As I say, when you zoom out and you look at the animal as a whole, you're not going to be doing this amount of detail in that unless you are doing it at that scale. Blend these out a little bit more. So you can see how bitty it's getting now, which is what you want to the reference picture. Okay, so we know that these areas we can start coming in much darker now. In fact, I am going to glaze over a good portion. You can hear it going over the indenting. Like when you do leaf rubbing. There we go. You can see how it takes quite a while, but eventually it really just starts to come together. So you do need to, not that it's my strong point, but you do need to practice some patience when you do this. So if you're going to use the slice tool, it's rounded on the bottom, so you want to make sure that your blade is facing upwards and you're using the rounded tip underneath. And then you can just go in and add some very short, stumpy highlights. And again, going in various directions, just to ensure that you have enough colour or wax down on your paper before you do this, otherwise you run the risk of damaging your paper. The reason I like to do this with a little bit of speed is because it stops me getting those precise straight lines, because that's what we want to avoid. Okay, now I am actually going to go in with some black, but I'm not going to be really hard with the black. I'm just going to use it to just strengthen a few areas here and there. You should never blow on your work, so I'm being really naughty. If you know the reason why you shouldn't blow on your work, comment below. There is a valid reason why you should never do it. I'm going to head back to my Payne's Grey. I'm just going to shade in a few of the, where I see it underneath the indentation, I'm just going to shade in a little bit here and there underneath. And what that does is it makes the highlights pop, and it also adds some more shadow in there. So rather than them being very fur-like, we're going to add some more solid shading underneath. Just adds a bit of depth underneath where you're seeing those patches of highlights. It's starting to lift it much more forward now. This is sort of similar to how you would look at doing wet fur. You would have that strong contrast between your highlight and your shadow. And you can just keep doing that as much as you want. Aim is to lift the highlight that you can see underneath. It helps the fur to have much more of that not clumped look as such, which this sort of does, but it just aids towards it having much more of a 3D messy look rather than a smooth, all the fur going in a similar direction, rather than it being that flat lay. It has a bit more body to it. I'm just going to swap to the dark sepia now. Because I just want a little bit of warmth in some of the areas rather than the colder tone that you get from the Payne's Grey. Strengthen the shadows in this section here. And then this one in here. Okay, just a little bit more to strengthen up, and I think we're nearly there. So if you have enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give me a thumbs up so your friends and family can see it too. It's always good to share the love. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you get notified whenever my Fur Friday tutorials come out. I go live every Wednesday and I try and have another upload on a Monday. So yeah, just to make sure you don't miss out, hit the bell notification button and select the notification for all. So that is it from me. Have a good morning, afternoon, evening, whichever it may be, guys, and I shall see you on the other side. Bye.